Hi everyone, I'm Mike and this is the Sunday Art Show. This week we're back down at Exmouth Beach, and you may remember a couple of weeks ago I was down there on a beautifully sunny day in February and I just showed a brief painting outside, quick sketch of the view across the river. Now today it's just a couple of weeks later, same beach but nearer the sea, so just a bit further down the estuary. As you can see, rather different weather conditions. A lot cloudier, a lot greyer and a lot colder, I can assure you. But what is amazing about the beach today, and Exmouth is really good as a beach because it's so affected by the tides. The landscape and the shape of the beach and the different rocks you can see, sandbanks that are formed, they're changing all the time from week to week. There's always something new to see. But today was really spectacular because I've never seen the tides so far out at this particular beach. And so there were parts of the beach which were revealed to me for the first time. There were big pools of water which I hadn't seen before. Lots of different rock formations or sand formations. Here's one of these big pools. The dog having some fun there with the gulls. So really cool environment to explore and just go for a relaxing walk. And of course also a very inspiring environment to do some outdoor sketching. The other really good thing is Exmouth Beach is normally separated by a headland of cliff, some red cliffs which you'll see just in a moment, from the neighbouring beach which is Sandy Bay. So Exmouth Beach kind of looks out across the mouth of the river over towards Dawlish and Dawlish Warren. There's the cliff. If you walk around the other side of that cliff then you come to the beach known as Sandy Bay. And Sandy Bay just looks out into the English Channel. Now normally you can't walk from one to the other, or not easily at least, and certainly not when the tide is high, but with the tide this far out, really easy to walk from one to the other. So this was one of the first things which caught my eye for a possible sketch. This big pool of water isn't normally there. So I've actually got a backpack with me with quite a lot of different bits of equipment in, but I thought today I was going to keep it simple and I was going to kind of do what I call not a game as such, but just a method of working called hit and run. So the idea is to have a walk on the beach, maybe do a bit of running to get a bit of exercise, and also do some really quick experimental sketches to experiment with technique, to tune in the old observational skills, and also just to get some outdoor painting in, because it's always better to observe from life than it is to work from reference photos. So I've got my mixed media paper pad here, A4 in size. Sorry about obscuring the view. The view will come into view, I guess, in just a moment when I lower the pad. And what you can see I'm doing here is I've got a burnt umber watercolour marker pen. And I wanted to experiment with this one because burnt umber is the colour I've used in acrylic a huge amount over the years. Not quite so much recently, but years ago I used to do a lot of figure drawings and animal drawings, and I would often use just burnt umber to do monochrome studies. Sometimes I combine that with a little bit of yellow ochre, and I really like the surprisingly wide range of tones and effects you can achieve with this simple colour. So this is a newly acquired colour in the watercolour markers for me. I didn't have this one in my collection, so that's why I thought, well, I'll keep things simple. That's going to allow me to work quickly. It's going to allow me to go from different location to different location very easily without having to pack up the palette and clean up, all the brushes and stuff. And as you can see, what I'm doing is I've popped in the horizon line, popped in the outline of the very distant cliffs. Then I put the left-hand cliffs in, these distinctive red rock cliffs that you get on this part of the Devon coast. And I've outlined where the pool of water is. So I'm just walking down into that pool of water now to wet my clean brush. So it's about 3/4 of an inch wide, flat synthetic brush. And as you may have seen from some of my quick animal watercolour studies that I've been doing recently, one of the things I've been experimenting with doing is putting down these marker lines and then moving the watercolour paint around with a clean wet brush. So I thought I'd use the same technique for these seascape studies with a bit of a twist if you stay a bit further into the video, a little bit of a twist coming, and but this time with the burnt umber, seeing what sort of effects I can get. So way off in the distance, the fisheye does distort it a little bit. You can see those bluey distant cliffs. So I've just filled in my distant cliffs with a light wash there. Done the same thing for the nearer cliffs and for that rock formation on the left. And again, a little bit difficult to see on the off in the distance there, but that rock formation on the left is kind of a zigzagging stream of water coming in towards this pool. So what I'm doing now is just getting a little bit more water from the pool there onto the brush. There's my backpack full of equipment, got my ink tents, travel set in there along with a couple of other things. And a really nice day down here to explore, as I said, and so much going on as well. There were loads of walkers, loads of people walking dogs, people flying kites. There are nearly always people kiteboarding out on the water at Exmouth. Sometimes you'll see jet skis and stuff like that as well, yachts and so on. So I've just added in, this was one of the things I wanted to capture from the pool, the reflection of the cliffs in that pool of water. So having put down that first wash of colour, I've now going in and adding a little bit more detail here and there, and I've switched to the other nib on the pen. So I've mentioned before in previous videos, these markers are really great because they've got a brush tip, and that's what I use to put down the first set of lines. But in addition, they've got this fine line tip that I'm using now. And obviously you get different effects with each. So just switching to the fine line tip and putting in a few more details just to describe the scene, a few contour lines, a few areas of deep shadow. And this little dog's just lost his beach ball in the pool of water. So that's the other cool thing for coming down to the beach and doing stuff like that, is that what I plan on doing is a little cartoon of this dog at the water's edge, kind of looking, hey, I need to get my ball back. That's kind of cool. And these little adventures that I go on, whether I've got my art stuff with me or not, constant source of inspiration for me. So, for example, a couple of years ago, I went paddleboarding for the very first time. And to be honest, I didn't get on with it all that well. I enjoyed the experience, but I kind of struggled with the balance and having to constantly keep moving the board. But it inspired two little works of art for me. The first one was a cartoon of a guy kind of wobbling on the board, feeling a little unsteady. I'll pop that up on screen now. You can see the sausage dog owner has just rescued the ball for the animal. So that happy ending. And then the other one was, when I was tired from actually paddling the paddleboard, I ended up lying on my back on top of the thing, just gazing up at the clouds in the sky. And that inspired just a painting of the clouds and sky, which I'll put up on screen as well. So this trip is, it's so multi-purposed and lots of different benefits for me. Let me just go back to the sketch for the moment. You can see I've popped in some people at different distances to help create a sense of perspective, and I also just put the shoreline in as well on the right. A couple of other extra lines, and this one's coming fairly close to completion. I'll pop up on screen and a close-up of this particular sketch if you want to take a better look. I'll also, I don't know if I'll put all of these paintings on my website because they're just quick studies. I may do, I may put some of them up. But what I will do is put images of them up on my on the blog section of my website. So I'll definitely put a link to all that stuff in the description of the video as usual. So now at this point I'm kind of thinking, okay, I think I've probably done enough more or less on this sketch. I could keep going, but it's not really the idea of the day. The idea is to do a quick sketch, pack up my equipment, get the bag back on the back, and then take a bit of a run or a bit of a walk, depending on how energetic I'm feeling through the day. So you can see at the moment we're up to high speed. All right, relatively high speed. All right, faster than walking speed. And you can see we're experiencing different landscapes. And the next thing which caught my eye was this wonderful rock, almost like a big shark's fin. So you could imagine a huge shark buried in the sand here, and the reflection in the wet sand. So I decided, because the rest of the view was fairly similar to what I'd just done, decided just to take a quick reference photo of that on my phone. And here's a great example of all the different terrains, the different rocks covered in all the green plants and seaweed. You get lots of different shellfish on top of the rocks. The colour of the rock here, like I said, it's often red, like the cliffs, but you also get kind of paler clay type colours, greens, dark purples, dark browns. So I guess my one regret from today was not doing some studies of the rock formations themselves. I did only work looking at the more general view, but still, brilliant fun. So these rocks are completely covered with loads of mussels and seaweed and obviously rock pools and stuff. And you can see what a beautiful day it is, but in an unconventional way. The water's kind of brown and murky. The sky is kind of grey-blue. It's misty off in the distance. You know, got the red cliffs. You've got the kind of reddish golden sand. The sea's kind of calm, but still waves coming in. So this was my next selection for review. So I'm standing on this outcrop of rock, which is, as you can see, going off out into the sea. So it almost feels like you're standing in the sea, looking back at the beach. And once again, I'm popping in an outline of with the burnt umber there. Now the rock that I just drew in on the horizon line there to the left of the cliff, that's actually that shark fin shaped rock that I took a photograph of before. So I'm popping in now just a sweeping outline, a jagged outline of the reflection of the main bank of cliffs, and some wavy lines here to simulate the water rushing in from the left. One of the things I didn't include in this sketch, but I do in a later one, is that beautiful hazy sun up in the sky, top left there. There really was a wonderful sense of sort of eerie, misty light on this particular day. Once again, using my brush in the seawater technique. I don't know why, I just quite like using some of the water from the environment in these little sketches or in a painting when I can. And so what I tried to do there didn't work all that well. I just flicked up the line of the cliff, and that was an attempt to capture some of the trees which were line the top of the cliff there. But so we'll come back to those in a bit. But I'm just kind of softly putting in. You can't see it on camera, in fact, but off beyond that shark fin cliff, you can see the distant hills, but they're very, very pale. The Holden Hills off in the distance. So that's what I was just doing with a very, very weak wash above the left-hand horizon line. Started to fill in some colour on the cliffs themselves, and I've got a nice darker colour there coming in because I put down a thicker line, so when I moved that area of watercolour around, you know, a greater amount of pigment got moved, so started to fill in some of the reflection as well. Doing something similar with some sweeping brush strokes for the water. And once again, these are designed, it's just designed to be a very, very quick study. What can you capture in maybe 5 minutes or less? One colour, you've just got to make some decisions and go quick. And I find this practice really, really useful because it forces you to simplify. So going back to those trees now, I've switched to the line, the narrow nib on the marker pen, and I'm just putting in some very quick lines going up and down to capture some of those trees on the cliff top over the top of that very light wash I'd included. Putting in just a few lines on the cliffs there to capture some of the texture. And what I'm doing there, you won't be able to see that clearly, but I will pop the sketch up on screen in just a moment, is there are actually some people up on top of the cliff. So again, putting people into and at the bottom of the cliff as I'm drawing now. So putting people into a landscape is a great way of introducing a sense of scale, especially when you've got a very simple line and wash drawing, monochrome like I'm doing here. So I've included somebody taking a walk nearer to us as well on the right hand side of the sketch. And when you look at the finished sketch, that really helps to sell the idea that this is a big cliff we're looking at on the right hand side, because we can see, compared to the average person, something we're all conditioned to recognise very strongly. We can compare the height of that person to the height of the cliff, and it's something we do just automatically. So that little sketch is coming together quite well. And one of the things this also forces you to do is kind of think about composition quickly and make decisions. And so, as valuable as it is to have this whole experience, this wonderful experience down on the south coast of Devon, it's just as valuable, I think, afterwards to come back and look at the little collection of sketches you created and see what worked and what didn't work, and then that helps inform future decisions in later work. So I'm coming back in with a second wash now, moving the wet brush again over the marks that I put down before, and adding a little bit more detail and a little bit more texture to different areas. I was just trying to suggest a little bit of a reflection for that close by person, and I tried to pick up some of the watercolour off of a little patch I put down for that rock, but that didn't work too well. But nonetheless, on the whole, that sketch I was pretty happy with, so I decided to move on to another location. So we're still heading towards Sandy Bay here, a little bit of a time jump. Now, in these conditions, the kind of misty, cool conditions, the paint was actually taking quite a long time to dry, so that's why I haven't packed away the sketch. And one of the things I'm really liking about this burnt umber with the watercolour marker is that when you do it in a wash, sometimes you almost get an orangey brown coming through with those thin washes, as you can see there. So just swiping a drip of water away with my finger. So heading into what I thought was going to be the shallows here, but turned out to be a little bit deeper than expected, and getting close to the water coming over the Wellington boots. It looks really shallow on camera, but it was getting pretty close and pretty deep. So decided to clamber up on top of the rock there to get to safer high ground. Now this is just a really quick little sketch I did because I wanted to try something completely different, something that I personally haven't tried before, and this was inspired by the pouring and swiping work of Anne-Marie Ridderhoff. I quite often check out her channel, and I'll put a little clip up of some of the stuff she does. So I thought, well, maybe I can do a swipe in the seawater of my watercolour sketch, and as you can see, the watercolour didn't move at all. So I thought, okay, well, I'll try it again, but in the other direction, see if getting it more wet does anything. And as you'll see in a moment, basically nothing much happened. So sorry about the camera angle. I put the wet paper on a rock there and started to move stuff around with a brush, but I discarded that one. That one didn't work all that well. So that's one of the things when you do a little adventure like this, is to just be accepting of things that don't work and accepting of things that do work. You know, it's just trying to be open-minded and explore the environment, see what's going on. So this is another almost, you know, lunar landscape, this wonderful configuration of pools and rocks and sand and shellfish and all the different, you know, plant life and stuff that grows. So, you know, really fun to explore all the patterns. So this is kind of the stuff I was thinking, you know, you could almost do a wonderful abstract looking at some of these textures, or capturing the light which reflects in a rock pool. You know, maybe you could do an inverted version of the seascape just by painting what you see in the reflection in a rock pool. So we're heading towards Sandy Bay still. Just jumping ahead a little bit there. Another little spur of rocks coming out into the sea, and it's really wonderful because although, you know, it's a big beach and loads of people there, but you know, you can still get some space without problem. There's a real sort of, everyone seems to be in a pretty good mood because they're out by the water walking their dogs and stuff. So really lovely environment to spend an afternoon. This is almost like a ragged version of a Giant's Causeway here. So just, you know, enjoying being by the water's edge and getting closer and closer to Sandy Bay itself. Well, we're pretty much on the edge of Sandy Bay now. And you can see the landscape here is a little calmer. You know, this beach does not experience the weird sort of river currents and tidal effects that Exmouth beach does. So this is just more of your standard South Devon sandy beach. Tends to stay fairly stable in appearance. Obviously the tide comes in and out, but apart from that, it's fairly consistent in the way it looks. So what I'm doing here is just a quick shot of the next view that I'm going to paint. But this time I thought I'd change things a little bit and go for the portrait orientation. If you've seen some of my other videos, you know this is something I enjoy a lot, whether it's with animals or landscapes. I just enjoy doing that, especially when I'm working outdoors. As mentioned before, one of the reasons I enjoy it is it forces me to make unusual composition decisions, and furthermore it forces you to select which part of a panoramic view am I going to work on. So it's a really nice way to work, I think. And one of the things I tend to do is I tend to put the horizon line quite high up when I work this way. And having just said that, it's just occurred to me that perhaps I ought to be a bit more open to putting the horizon line much further down and making the sky a more dominant presence in the composition. So this time, same kind of technique, popping in some of the rocks and the cliff outlines. You can see I've put a slightly distorted version of a walker there. Didn't do a particularly good job on that walker and their reflection in the wet sand. So I popped that in quite early this time. And coming in again with the brush tip, this time on its side, putting in a darker layer, a heavier layer of colour this time. So the idea here being to, by having that darker cliff, the main cliff, be much darker than the one behind it. That's going to allow me to create a sense of depth, I hope, fairly easily. And I just put in some shading on the reflections of the cliffs and the wet sand, and notice I used horizontal lines there, whereas I used diagonal lines for the cliff. So again, much like the way I paint animals, I'm trying to give some information with the direction of line work or brush work that I'm applying. So here we go, just been over to the sea, got some water on the brush again, and creating some texture by moving the brush around through that region of pigment, and then horizontal brush strokes, but also extending some of that watercolour out into the uncoated area of the paper, because that's what, as you know, that's what happens with wet sand. It's not, the edges of the reflection are often quite jagged. Sometimes a part of the beach will be a little bit higher than the rest and will have dried out more quickly, so you get these broken reflections. And again, you can see we've got this wonderful hazy sun up in the sky. So I'm now just putting in a very, very light wash for that distant part of the cliff which is peeking round the corner. And for those of you, who haven't used these little cameras before, as I mentioned earlier, they do have a fisheye. So the reason my sketch looks somewhat out of proportion to what you're seeing behind the pad of paper, it's not that my measurements are that far out. I'm not saying they're perfect by any means, but that little distant cliff looks so much smaller on camera in the fisheye than it does in reality. Just adding a little bit of reflection this time, which worked rather better than the last time. So it's kind of a pity the walker isn't quite as good as the last walker, but it's okay. It's not too bad. I feel I've created a sense of light there, and light coming down onto the wet sand. Just adding that reflection underneath the person there helps to create that illusion. Now, one of the things which caught my eye when I was looking up into the sky were these wonderful mottly, bitty clouds which were surrounding the sun. And so I'm just enjoying running the brush across the paper there in different ways to create the different kind of textures of cloud cover that we've got today. And then, again, not sure how well this will show up on camera, but in a moment what you're going to see are some seagulls flying across the screen, and they may be too far off in the distance due to the fisheye lens. We'll see how it goes. But I was just sort of considering what to do next, and looking at this now, I wish I'd painted the reflection of the sun in the wet sand, but I forgot to do that. So what I actually do now before the seagulls come across is, again, off in the far, far distance, there are some people on that outcrop of rock that I was on earlier. And they're tiny off in the distance, and then I'm popping in some a little bit larger. So once again, we're creating a sense of perspective and a sense of distance. There was a seagull just flying in on the left. I think you'll see some others in just a moment. And so what I'm doing is just getting my pad ready, trying to capture a particular pose of a seagull as it flies past. And I want to get, here it comes from the left, coming out the right-hand side of the pad in a moment. There we go. So that's the gull I'm trying to copy mid-flight, and just trying to capture, a pose of a bird in mid-flight. So not too bad a job, but certainly not my best effort there. Just put in another little gull in the distance. Having put those gulls in, I'm sort of thinking about what to do, and I happened to glance down at the sand. And it occurred to me that on this entire walk, having walked over and noticed lots of different shells and pebbles, I hadn't included any aspect of that in any of the sketches. So I've just added a few little indications of those things at the bottom of this particular painting. And then I decided to get rid of the gulls. So with a wet brush and my finger, I'm just working into the area of that bit of paint there. And you can see that the clouds in the sky are actually quite a bit darker on that region of the sky. So as I'm sort of walking back now, I just kind of continue to work on that with the brush, just to completely lose any evidence at all of those two birds being present. So that's that little sketch done. So I'll pop that up on the screen for you so you can get a quick look. And I'll also leave the link in the description, as I said. And then the next sketch is facing in the other direction. So we're looking towards Sandy Bay, and taking a slightly different approach this time, coming in with the fine line marker and just working in a much more kind of squiggly, intricate way to depict very loosely still the line of those distant cliffs. And then here's the shoreline coming in now, the water rushing in from right to left, some sort of indication of the waves. And what I'm going to try and do is a slightly different approach in terms of, the failed sketch I did earlier where I put the paper in the water and tried to do a swipe. As you saw, that didn't work at all. So for this one, I'm going to take a different approach, and I'm actually going to let one of the small waves hit the paper and see if that has a better effect on the paint. So we'll see what happens. So there's my little sketch, very quick. I think that probably took less than a minute, not much more. So just let that little wave hit the page, and this time I got quite a nice effect. It really kind of blasted the paint. It's automatically created kind of a sense of, if you like, sea mist rising or water splashing. So that's something that I'll maybe explore in the future. I mean, obviously I do this already at home with the spray bottle of water, but it's not something I tried in particular. But what I found here was when I worked the wet brush across just to maneuver some of the paint, it was actually lifting off a lot of those areas where the water had splashed. So, and I'm just wiping some off with my finger there, and having discovered that, I thought, well, okay, I can actually just take some paper towel and mop up some of that paint. So that's what I'm doing here, just cleaning up certain areas where I feel there needs to be a bit more light. But it's quite a nice way to create, if you look at the bottom of the cliffs there where the water is splashed, that kind of begins to suggest a reflection in the water. And equally in the foreground where I've got some of the runs coming down, that's starting to suggest wet sand as well, but again a very loose presence. So as you can see, I've now decided to do a little bit more running, not too much, and I'm heading back now in the other direction. So just giving you another look at this amazing landscape. Look at all the different colours you've got here, including the dog there, just interested in me for some reason. So as you can see, you get rock falls from this particular type of cliff. But that's pretty much it for this week's video. So I hope you enjoyed this little adventure, walking from Exmouth Beach to Sandy Bay and all the different sketches I did. I can't recommend the experience highly enough if you've never done this before, kind of combining a little bit of an adventure with just some quick sketches in different locations. I find it really relaxing and really rewarding. If you've got any questions at all, please remember to ask me in the comments. As always, please remember to comment, like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you next Sunday for the next episode of The Sunday Art Show. Thanks very much for watching.